Okay, I take it that you've watched the recommended series. And if you have, you're going to have no problem understanding what I'm about to show you. So, because it's getting late, I'm going to go ahead, even though I've got a lot more information than I feel that I should build up before I show you what we've got going on here. I'm just going to go ahead and bring you to this point now because the other series should have clued you in if you watched them. Alright. If we're talking about, in a sense, we're talking about a holographic reality. Not in the sense that reality is not real, but the way that reality projects itself is via hologram. DNA itself is holographic. And you should know this, like I said before in another video, like a crime scene detective, nowadays they have the ability, because of the DNA technology, that if they find just a little hair, an eyelash, a toenail, it doesn't matter from which part the portion of biological material comes from, that portion is going to reflect the image of the entirety of the whole DNA program. And if you know something about a hologram, just real fast here, think about those prizes in the cereal boxes when you were younger. And some of them had that little plastic image that would have a picture on it, and then if you turned it and tilted it one way or another, the image would appear in 3D. That's a hologram. Well, in reality, a true working hologram, if it were to be imprinted on something that could be shattered like glass or something that could be cut, once the image on the hologram has been set, let's say that this image is an apple, you could shatter the hologram into as many pieces as you wanted, and that hologram, each piece would still reflect the entirety of the apple. It would reflect the apple whole. And that's a lot about the nature of the fractal and how we can find in the tiniest bit of information to the largest bit of information. The tiniest amount of biological material from a man to the very man himself has the exact same projection of DNA, the exact same blueprint. Well, it's no different for the entirety of creation, from the smallest form particle. Basically, we'll just represent it as an atom, but it does go smaller than that. But the smallest form particle, as you see, this atom has the very same geometry. Exactly the same geometry as the hexagon, which will in turn form, just as you see here, our three-dimensional cube, which at the same time can revert and make back the star tetrahedron, which can also make the same image of the geometry of the quartz crystal, which is related to the connection that these beings themselves are sealed within the crystal. So we are talking about the sealing on multiple levels, and in order for them to break the seal, which is connected now to your faith, it's connected to your consciousness. You are the one that has been given dominion over the earth. The collective majority of mankind have the ability to give this earth up. And that's exactly what the trick is of the fallen ones, is that they're trying to manipulate us and shift our consciousness. And they are right at the point to where they're going to be able to shift us into the fulcrum of their opinion, as I've said before. So to the very smallest of particle, to the very largest of particle identity, we have the same geometry. This is a planet. It's planet Earth. Look up circumscribed tetrahedral geometry, and you'll begin to understand about this Enigma 19.5, and then you'll understand about the geometry of 19.5 as it's associated with the pyramids of Giza, which has everything to do with this quartz crystal, and then has everything to do with what we're talking about with the seal. If you remember from what we talked about in Ezekiel chapter 19, and then even Ezekiel chapter 19.5 is the key for the code of where these beings are being sealed, bound, and kept, as it's associated with the Great Pyramids of Giza, which would also be associated with the bands of Orion, which then connects back to Job chapter 38, who can loose the bands of Orion. Well, who is being held underneath these bands of Orion is who the loosing is all about. That's about breaking the seal. That has to be done through the shifting of your consciousness. So from the smallest particle of an atom, now let's move up our understanding to the actual atom man, the fullness of the projection of the atom. Now we go to the man and we see, guess what? The exact same geometry is in place. Exactly. It's the exact same geometry that we see here and here. Okay, you should be able to see that. And it all derived originally from this understanding of the checkerboard, the Freemasonic checkerboard of this light and dark. Okay, and the symbolism that's associated with this grand royal arch of Freemasonry. So if we can go from the small atom to the fullness of the projection of the hologram of the living atom, the man, the same geometry is there within the head, which now begins to make sense for everything that I said concerning the third eye location, the darkening, the light eye, as it's associated with the same geometry for the hemispheres of the brain up top. If we can take that geometry from the atom, go to the atom man, and then we can take that geometry and apply it to the earth, and then take that exact same geometry and apply it to our perception of the solar system. And it's all one and the same. And they just don't teach us that. And if you were able to grasp that, so much more of the truth begins to fall in place. These are the things that were denied from us. And even the people that think that they have the secrets, they don't realize what the secrets are really all about. They are trying to keep the truth of Jesus Christ, the validity of the presence of Jesus Christ, as the secret from us. And all of this, as you will move forward, will confirm the very identity of Jesus Christ as the true Son of God, who has literally gotten up on the cross in every possible manifestation that you can imagine, from the lowest of the physical perspective to the highest of the spiritual reality. Jesus Christ is worthy, and he was able to fit that bill. So the geometry is consistent. This is why the geometry is associated with the seal. Now you see why it's so important for them to alter your perception of reality, because you are the one that contains the seal, and they have to get you to give up your sovereignty so that you can accept the lead of these false shepherds and eventually be led with the wolves to the murderer. The truth of Jesus Christ can free you. Now you think of this shape here. All right? The Masonic checkerboard, black, dark, matter, white, light to spirit. This is the same thing that we're looking at here. Okay? So we take this human head geometry that has within it the sequence of the division of the knowledge, the darkening of the right eye from Zechariah 11:17, which we're still going to read because we have exact biblical confirmation for this, but you should already know that if you viewed the series that I told you to. So now we'll superimpose the human head, in other words, the human consciousness perspective, and we'll put it right here. Perfectly overlaying the same geometry. This is going to be able to tell us the story of exactly what's going on. Now, in order to get what you're looking at here, this is just a smaller version, as I said. This is the galactic interpretation associated with the sun, the solar interpretation, and then we come down to the individual particle association of the solar system, which are the individual planets that revolve around it, the exact same geometry. Now, the Earth here is going to represent the exact same thing, the human head, because mankind was created from the dust of the earth, and to dust he shall return. So ultimately, his geometry in form creation in material is going to reflect the exact same geometry and form creation of which he was created from, just like it reflects the exact same form geometry of the atom of which he was created from, just as you see right here. And then this is what the mystery of the 666 is all about, because it represents the carbon atom, the dust of the earth. That geometry of the earth should be seen in this perspective. We know that the earth is at a 23.5 degree tilt in its axis, its magnetic axis, its rotational axis. The earth is revolving in this direction with this arrow along this rotational axis at about 23 degrees. Now, true north is not where we're rotating on our axis, but there is a true north. But what we're talking about is magnetic north, which is going to match up with our consciousness of the energy of the human mind, that which they're trying to truly create as the pole shift. So the planetary pole shift is reflective of the humanitary pole shift, but it's not a geographical pole shift. It's a magnetic mental shift of polarity that they're trying to create. And this number here from 23 will give us the clue to how it originated, because it's going to go all the way back to the 23 enigma of the plan of the sons of God to come into the daughters of men to create the rights of succession, because these daughters gave up 2/3 more genetic to the offspring than the male did. So they would be the logical choice for the sons of God to infiltrate, to instill their genetics into the population so that they could create a control race known as the elite or the Illuminati to orchestrate their plans. So moving back here, if we're revolving at a 23 degree tilt, well, let's go back in history for a moment here. The 23 degree tilt is associated with precession, which is associated with the wobble of the earth, which is what gives us that view that I showed you earlier of how we view the sun as it's snaking up and down. That's our observation of the sun from Earth. But in reality, if the Earth was not wobbling around, we would see the sun make the straight track along the ingress on the ecliptic. But because of this, Earth has been knocked silly in the past. Now the silly observers from the Earth have the faulty material view of the sun along the declination, the path, the ingress of the sun. So what is the thing that has now hit the Earth in the past? Well, we've gone over it in the Bible. The Bible tells you, in the past, a great falling star, Lucifer, Satan, the devil, they were cast to the earth. This is being symbolized now as the second cup, which is going to be a huge collision or cataclysm. This is key to understand how they're going to make the shift for the next degrees suddenly in this direction with the next cataclysm. The first cataclysm that they started, you could find in the beginning of Genesis, when the earth was made without form and void. After the first line of Genesis, when the earth itself was actually created, the second line, we see that a judgment has taken place and the earth was without form and void now. This is how the earth goes from this position, boom, knocked over to this 23 degree position now, which you'll hear in the occult circles called the 23 enigma. But I don't think anybody from any of these circles honestly understands this enigma like I'm explaining it to you right out my head on the spot right now. Through the eyes of the Spirit. Through the Spirit of the truth, Jesus Christ. So, how do we establish that we have this actual true north is the actual way that we establish that we know that we're on a 23-degree tilt in our axis. That's because of this line of the ecliptic. So we take the line of the ecliptic and then we pull up 90 degrees from that in association with the Earth. We understand exactly where true north is, and then from this we can gauge exactly where the 23-degree tilt in the axis is perfectly. And then you can make the connections to Freemasonry as to why the 90-degree angle, the Freemasonic square, is so important. It's even going to relate back to what we looked at here if I have enough time to explain it. So now this is the model of the Earth on its 23-degree tilt. Something has knocked it in the distant past into this direction. This is associated with the original fall of Lucifer, these rebels. They've actually caused something to take place in the past. We'll talk about that another time. But that is what has knocked this Earth silly. And when I say that they have caused it, it's they claim the cause written and they write it into their mythology. Okay, with the creation epics, the Enuma Elish, where we have this astrotheology where all of the planetary bodies of our immediate solar system has been named with these ancient Anunnaki gods, just like we have those who tout Saturn and all this stuff have something to really actually do with anything. Really, they're just symbolisms for these ancient Anunnaki gods who are the real movers and shakers of our world, pushing us into this corruption. So that's really astrotheology, where the ancients have applied the mythology to the stars in order to preserve the story so that they could symbolize it and encode it, and then teach it only to the initiates. But to the masses, we're just blindly looking up at supposed pretty pictures in the sky. But these pretty pictures in the sky, known as the zodiac, actually track the ancient historical record, the ancient historical agenda, and what the great work is hoping to achieve throughout all of these ages, and which is to bring these beings into our material realm, give them dominion, and cause the very serpent himself to be seen as God in our eyes. And this is why the perception of our eyes must be altered, which in turn relates to the perception of our consciousness, which in turn relates back to the global collective of consciousness, which will bring us right back to this position where we are right now. We know that magnetic north scientifically is actually moving at about 40 miles per year, which is telling you that this shift is taking place within the magnetic consciousness of the planet. Well, now you know the magnetic consciousness of the planet follows the same geometric rules of creation known as the pattern of the flower of life, which is reminiscent of the original design from Eden, where God literally says, let the earth bring forth every animal after its kind. Let the earth bring forth the representation of these small particles with the projection, the program for the end result of the identity of all of the creatures on this world could be found within the smallest particles of dust in the original creation of this world. The only thing that needed to animate them was that spirit breath of life, which now represents the Holy Ghost seal, which is the seal which was instilled into the entirety of everything in creation. This is why creation itself springs forth from the simplest of particles known as dust. This dust has manifested itself from a supposed meaningless atom to the actuality of the potential of the atom as the human man. And I hope you understand this. So now we take the model of the human head with a darkened right eye, the left eye. They have us completely and totally dwelling within this right hemisphere of the understanding of the brain as the left hemisphere of the brain as the right eye understands it. So we're connected directly to this darkness of observation. This is why in the Bible it says, even though that it's noonday, we grope for the walls like it was midnight, like it was dark time, because we are literally in this darkness, the valley of the shadow of death, by the deception that they've thrown upon the world, by denying us the spiritual understanding, the spiritual knowledge, as we've already talked about. So if we take the geometry here and line it up, this is what we need to do. This is where we are right now. And I want you to begin to think about the human head. Okay? This is a human head tilting. Okay? Imagine one eye over here and one eye over here. And then along the neckline, the human head is tilting. Okay? Think about that in the behavior of people. That usually when you're talking to somebody, trying to explain something very complex to somebody, they tilt their head. And that usually means two things. Either they're absolutely confused or they're in awe. They're enamored. And they are, in a sense, just kind of looking at you with wonderment. That's the perspective that we see. The perspective that falls upon us, that they are hoping that we are in, is confusion. And that would be Babylon. We see that the Bible says in multiple places that all of the foundations of the earth are out of course. And as I told you, this tilt in our rotational axis at 23 degrees, which is connected to the 23 Enigma, which is supposed to be telling you something, which is what I'm hoping I'm telling you now, is explaining. Lining this up on the actual magnetic rotational axis and aligning it up with the human head tells us that the human perception of observation is caught in this stance, and that one portion of humanity, the greatest portion of humanity, is caught in this stance of confusion, aka Babylon. Babylon means confusion. 90% of the people out there are just absolutely confused. Confused. And that's going to relate back to the fusion of the good and evil that they're trying to bring about on this earth is really a con. This fusion of the knowledge of good and evil is a confusion. So it's going to relate back to the other side that believes that they are illuminated. This illuminated side here that thinks that they have got it all figured out because they're not actually dwelling in the perceptual observation of the eye itself. They believe that they are dwelling in the intellectual observation here in this right hemisphere of the brain. If you remember, the Bible says continually about the ascension going to the right hand of the Father. Well, to these of the occult who believe they're going to achieve their divinity in the material and the flesh, that has everything to do with the intellect and the powers of the brain. In other words, the spiritual abode, which is going to be reflective in their own consciousness of the material Zion, which will be the right hemisphere of the brain. And then the left hemisphere of the brain, is connected to the right eye, that materialism connection there. So now you see at this 23-degree tilt of axis, one portion of mankind is caught in confusion with the tilting of the head, trying to understand. And then the other side is like a deer in the headlights, and they're in awe and in reverence of this supposed blinding light, but they don't realize that it's about to smack them silly. So the shift of consciousness is mapping out the exact same shift that's taking place with a magnetic north going 40 miles a day. 40 miles a year, So it's actually even beyond this point of the 23-degree marker. And it's speeding forward into this point right here. Well, that point is what's going to connect us to our picture right here. That point is going to be this point, and that's what they're trying to achieve. This 23 enigma, you could consider this phallus, as it's absolutely related to the daughters of man. They give up their 2/3 more genetics to their descendants. And of course, the key for them was the sacred feminine to achieve all this with the daughters of man. So now, this 23-degree point, I would call the phallus point. And they are trying to shift this phallus point to this position here, which needs another 23 degrees, roughly, to go to get it into the position that they're hoping to achieve right here, this androgyny. And that's going to be further explained as we move forward. So what's going to knock us over the rest of the way? If we had one, which would be the first cup, which is symbolized, the first cup is actually the thing that takes place in Genesis between lines 1 and line 2. As I told you, the earth was without form and void after line 1 in Genesis. That's symbolized as the first cup, which is 9/11, the terror, which symbolizes the two towers. The two towers are also symbolization of the two things that were offered to mankind that he accepted, that created the confusion that we have in this world that evolved itself into commercial Babylon. We see the second cup is going to be also symbolized with the very same destruction, but this destruction as it reaches its fruition. And then that would be a collision that the earth is going to experience also, but symbolically, it shifts us over the rest of the other 23 degrees. And then, lo and behold, now, look who is absolutely blinded upon the path of the solar ecliptic. That's us. That's lights out. Now we are absolutely blinded in the symbolic representation of this straight and narrow path of Jesus Christ as it's reflected in the actual geometry of the sun as it's observable in the solar system from Earth. I'll be back.